Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In a working-class neighborhood of New Orleans, where the walls were covered in colorful graffiti and cars honked their horns, a little black boy played the guitar. His name was Elijah Johnson, barely 10 years old, but already burdened with responsibilities far beyond his years. At his side, his 5-year-old sister Maya watched every movement of his fingers on the instrument's worn strings. The guitar, inherited from a neighbor who passed away too soon, had frayed strings and would scratched by time. But in Elijah's hands, it became magical. Each note seemed to tell its story, the pain of losing his parents, the nights spent praying for a warm meal, and the unconditional love he felt for his sister. Passers-by crowded around him, some stopping to listen, others continuing on their way without a glance. Elijah, focused, let his music do the talking for him. His goal wasn't to become famous, he simply wanted to feed his sister and dream of a future where they would no longer have to sleep hungry. What Elijah didn't know was that today, that melody would catch the attention of someone who would change his life forever. A melody, a guitar, and a brave boy would be enough to open the door to a destiny he never imagined. The sun was just beginning to break through the morning clouds when Elijah Johnson sat down on the sidewalk outside the Morning Brew Cafe. His old, battered guitar rested against his knees, and Maya sat beside him, holding a small box to collect the few coins from passers-by. Elijah carefully strummed the first notes. The melody was soft, almost sad, but filled with a pure emotion that seemed to suspend time. The busy passers-by occasionally stopped for a moment, some nodding their heads in time, others dropping a few coins and continuing on their way. "Come on, brother, they'll stop eventually," Maya whispered with a shy smile. Elijah gave him a loving look. "Patience, Maya, music always finds its audience." On the street, colors and sounds blended together, the roar of cars, the scent of freshly brewed coffee, and the laughter of children playing a little further away. Elijah, focused on his guitar, seemed isolated in a world of his own, where only music mattered. That morning, however, something changed. Around the corner, a well-dressed man, looking serious and elegant, slowed down when he heard the guitar. He looked at Elijah, intrigued. The man's name was Thomas Carter, a music producer known for discovering young talent. He approached, captivated by the purity and control of this boy who played with an emotion that couldn't be taught. Elijah didn't notice immediately. His fingers danced across the strings, telling a story that only those who listened with their hearts could understand. Maya, however, sensed that something important was happening. "Brother, he's looking at us," she whispered. Elijah looked up to see Thomas Carter slowly approaching, an encouraging smile on his face. For the first time, Elijah felt that his music could have a much greater impact than just a few coins in a box. On that day, the street that had seen him grow up would become the first chapter of a new destiny. Thomas Carter approached slowly, stopping a few steps away from Elijah. His eyes shone with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. He didn't want to frighten the boy, but he felt he was holding a rare, pure, and authentic talent in his hands. "Hello, little one," said Thomas in a warm voice, "my name is Thomas Carter. I heard your music from across the street. You play incredibly well." Elijah paused for a moment, surprised and a little suspicious. The adults in the neighborhood had often ignored or underestimated his talent. He gently placed his hands on the strings. "Thank you, sir. I'm just playing for my sister and me," he replied timidly. Maya, still sitting next to him, smiled shyly as she looked at Thomas. "He's very good," she said proudly. "He's been playing for us ever since our parents left." Thomas Carter crouched down to their level and pulled out a business card. "Listen, Elijah. I own a music studio and I work with young talent. If you want, I could take you to record some tracks. I want to show you what you could do with your music." Elijah felt his heart pound. The thought of leaving his street, even for a few hours, was daunting. But Thomas's gaze, filled with sincerity and enthusiasm, gave him a glimmer of hope. You mean I could play in a real studio?" he asked incredulously. Yes, exactly. Thomas replied with a smile. I think you have something special, something the world needs to hear. Maya grabbed her brother's hand. Brother, we have to go, maybe this is our chance, she murmured. Elijah took a deep breath. He looked one last time at the street he knew so well, the cobblestones where he had learned to dream, and the familiar faces that passed by every day without really seeing his talent. Then, with a mixture of nervousness and courage, he nodded. Okay, let's go, he said finally. Thomas Carter smiled and extended his hand to guide them. Elijah and Maya stood up, ready to cross the threshold into an unknown world. A guitar, a melody, and a brave little boy would be enough to begin an adventure that would change their lives forever. The taxi drove through the busy streets of New Orleans, and Elijah watched the city through the window. Every corner brought back memories, Maya's laughter, the evenings spent saving a few coins, and the times when his guitar had been his only refuge. It all seemed both familiar and distant, like a dream from which he was awakening. When the taxi stopped in front of a large, modern building, Elijah felt his heart race. Thomas Carter's studio gleamed in the sunlight, with large bay windows and musical instruments visible through the glass. He had never seen anything so impressive. Inside, the studio buzzed with activity. Engineers were adjusting microphones, musicians were rehearsing in another room, and the air was filled with the warm smell of instrument wood and fresh paint. Elijah felt tiny in the face of this unfamiliar world. Don't worry, Elijah, Thomas said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Everyone here is here to help you get your music out there. Elijah clutched his guitar and walked into the recording room. The lights and equipment seemed intimidating, but as soon as he placed his fingers on the strings, everything disappeared. Stress, fear, and doubt were replaced by music. The engineers listened in awe, amazed. Every note Elijah played told his story: poverty, loss, resilience, and love for his sister. The guitar vibrated beneath his hands, and for the first time, Elijah realized his music could touch more than just a few hurried passers-by. It's incredible, Maya whispered, looking at her brother. You really are magical. Thomas Carter smiled broadly. Elijah, you have a rare gift. And what you're playing here today is only the beginning. After several hours of rehearsal and recording, Elijah felt exhausted but happy. He had crossed an invisible threshold, the one where his music was no longer just a means of survival, but a gateway to the future. As he left the studio that evening, Elijah looked back at the street where he had grown up. He knew nothing would ever be the same again. A new life was opening up before him, a life where his dreams and his guitar could finally fully exist. A few days later, Thomas Carter took Elijah to a small private concert hall. The place was filled with producers, agents, and a few musicians. Elijah, still nervous, clutched his guitar. It was the first time he was going to play in front of so many people who didn't know him. Don't worry, Elijah, Thomas said softly. They came here to listen to music, not to judge you. Just play like you do on the street. Elijah took a deep breath. Maya, who had accompanied him, gave him a small wave, a reassuring smile on her face. This brief pause gave him the courage to go on stage. The lights came on, and a respectful silence fell over the room. Elijah placed his fingers on the strings of his guitar and began to play. The first notes, fragile and tentative, immediately captured everyone's attention. Then his confidence grew, and each chord told his story: the loss of his parents, the daily struggles, and the immense love for his little sister. The audience was captivated. Some had tears in their eyes, others smiled and nodded, feeling every emotion conveyed by the music. Elijah didn't play to impress, he played to be heard, to share what was on his heart. At the end of his performance, there was a heavy silence for a few seconds, then the entire room erupted into applause. Elijah felt his heart leap in his chest. For the first time, he understood that his music could touch others in a profound way. Thomas Carter approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. Elijah, you just won over your first audience. And believe me, this is just the beginning. Maya ran to him and kissed him on the cheek. I knew you could do it, she said, laughing. That evening, as he left the room, Elijah felt a new emotion, hope. For the first time in his life, he knew that his guitar was no longer just a tool for survival, but a means to transform his life and that of his sister. A few weeks after his first audition, Elijah's life began to change. Thanks to Thomas Carter, he had recorded several songs and received his first offers of concerts and collaborations. For him and Maya, the difficult daily life on the streets of New Orleans already seemed far away, replaced by a world full of opportunity and hope. The small apartment Thomas had found for them was modest, but to Elijah and his sister, it was a palace compared to the cold rooms and sidewalks where they had grown up. Every morning, Elijah sat by the window, guitar in hand, listening to the sound of the city as it continued its familiar rhythm, but with a new feeling, the sense of finally being able to control his destiny. "Brother, do you realize?" Maya said one morning, her eyes shining. "Now we have our own room, and there's even a real bed for me." Elijah smiled, touched by his sister's simple joy. "Yes. I know, Maya. And this is just the beginning. We'll keep working, and soon, everyone will be able to hear my music." Every day, Elijah practiced tirelessly. He learned new techniques, composed his own songs, and perfected his playing. But despite his new life, he remained humble and attached to his roots. He never forgot the passers-by on the street who, just a few months earlier, had listened to his notes without paying much attention. One day, Thomas Carter came to see him with a radiant smile. "Elijah, I have a proposition for you. We're going to organize a small concert in the neighborhood where you started playing. I want you to show everyone where you come from and how much you've grown." Elijah hesitated for a moment. The idea of returning to the streets seemed strange, almost intimidating. But then he thought of Maya and the children in the neighborhood, and his heart lit up. "Yes, let's do it. I want people to know that it's possible, that someone can change their life even from nothing." That day, Elijah played for his community for the first time as a recognized musician. Passers-by who had once ignored him stopped in amazement. Children watched in admiration, and adults smiled, proud to see the street boy transform his passion into true talent. For Elijah, every note he played that day represented more than just a melody. It was proof that perseverance, courage, and love for his sister could truly change a life. A few months after his first studio successes and small performances in local venues, Elijah felt it was time to return to where it all began, the streets of New Orleans. He wanted to share his music with those who had watched him grow up and show them that dreams could come true. Accompanied by Maya and a few musicians hired by Thomas Carter, Elijah set up his small stage in front of the Morning Brew Café, the same place where he once played for a few pieces. Passers-by who had known him as a child stopped, surprised to see the young boy they once ignored transformed into an accomplished musician. "Elijah, is that you?" asked an old neighbor, her eyes wide. "Yes, it's me." Elijah replied with a shy but proud smile. He picked up his guitar and began to play. The notes floated in the warm afternoon air, and soon a crowd had gathered, captivated by the melody and emotion Elijah conveyed. The neighborhood children watched him in admiration, and some shyly imitated his movements on small wooden guitars they had at home. "Brother, look," Maya whispered, her eyes shining. "They're all listening to you." Elijah smiled and continued playing. Each note told the story of his journey, the cold nights on the streets, the sacrifices to protect Maya, the dreams that seemed impossible but, thanks to music and perseverance, became reality. At the end of the performance, the crowd erupted in applause. Some adults quietly wiped away tears, touched by the story of this boy who had transformed his passion into a message of hope for all. Thomas Carter, standing at the back of the crowd, watched Elijah proudly. "You've touched more hearts today than you know, Elijah." Elijah looked at Maya and whispered, "It's for us, and for all those who think they don't stand a chance." This return to the neighborhood wasn't just a concert, it was a symbol. Elijah had proven that no matter where you come from, courage, talent, and love can transform lives and inspire an entire community. A few months after conquering his neighborhood, Elijah received his first real professional opportunity, an official concert at a renowned New Orleans venue, with invitations sent to producers, journalists, and music fans. On the day of the concert, Elijah stood backstage, clutching his guitar. Excitement and nervousness mingled in his stomach. Maya took his hand, giving him the silent courage he knew so well. "Brother, you're ready. Everyone's going to see how amazing you are," she whispered. Elijah took a deep breath. He'd started on a sidewalk, playing for a few rooms, and now he was going to play in front of a full house. But the moment he placed his fingers on the strings, all fears disappeared. The music was still the same, pure, sincere, full of emotion. The room lit up, and Elijah began to play. Each note resonated with his story, captivating the audience. Journalists frantically took notes, impressed by the young boy's mastery and emotional depth. Producers exchanged glances, knowing they were witnessing the birth of a true talent. Songs and applause erupted as Elijah played his original compositions, telling stories of resilience, love, and hope through every chord. This wasn't just a concert, it was a celebration of his transformed life. At the end of the performance, the entire room stood, cheering Elijah for several minutes. Tears of pride welled up in Maya's eyes, and Thomas Carter couldn't hide his smile. "Elijah, you conquered the world today. And this is just the beginning," he said, moved and proud. Elijah, exhausted but happy, looked at the crowd and whispered, "I want everyone to know, no matter where you come from, you can achieve your dreams." That night marked a turning point in Elijah's life. He was no longer just a boy on the street, he had become a musician capable of inspiring and touching lives wherever his music resonated. After his first major official concert, Elijah didn't let himself be carried away by his emerging fame. For him, every note played, every applause received, had a deeper meaning. He wanted to share his success with those who, like him, were struggling to survive and dream. A few weeks later, Elijah and Thomas Carter organized a music workshop in his old neighborhood. Street children and disadvantaged teenagers were invited to learn guitar, piano, and singing. Maya, always by his side, helped distribute instruments and encourage the participants. "Brother, look at these children," said Maya, her eyes shining. "They listen to you and want to learn to play like you." Elijah smiled. He remembered himself, sitting on the sidewalk with a battered guitar, dreaming of a better future. "Yes, and I'm going to show them that anything is possible, Maya. That they can use music to change their lives, just like me." He spent the day teaching, correcting awkward fingers on the strings, encouraging young talent, and sharing stories about his own life. The children, fascinated, drank in his words and advice. Elijah realized that his success was only worthwhile if it could inspire and help others. That evening, as he and Maya walked home, Elijah thought about how far he'd come. The streets, the battered guitar, the fear and hunger, transformed today into music, opportunity and hope. "I will never forget where I come from," he whispered. "And I don't want anyone else to forget that even in difficult times, there is always a chance to succeed." It was more than a music lesson, it was a life lesson. Elijah understood that his gratitude should be expressed not just in words, but in actions. And from that day on, he made it his mission to share his knowledge and hope with every child who needed a light in the darkness. A few months passed, and Elijah's life was now divided between his concerts, his studio recordings, and his work with the neighborhood children. His music resonated throughout the city, but for him, the most important thing remained the smile on the faces of Maya and the young people he inspired. One morning, Thomas Carter entered the apartment with exciting news. "Elijah, you've been invited to perform at a national festival. It's going to be a big stage, with hundreds, maybe thousands of spectators." Elijah felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. But he thought about his early days on the sidewalk and all the obstacles he had overcome. "All right, let's go. But I want Maya and the neighborhood kids to come too. They need to see that anything is possible." On the day of the festival, Elijah took the stage. The huge crowd, the bright lights, the cameras, and the applause seemed almost surreal. But as soon as he placed his fingers on the guitar, everything became simple again. The music spoke for him. The audience was captivated. Every note, every chord told his story, his journey from the streets to the spotlight. The messages of hope and perseverance he conveyed deeply touched everyone who listened. After the concert, Elijah met with young fans and families from all over. Many told him they too were going through difficult times, and that his music gave them hope. Elijah realized then that his dream was no longer limited to becoming a great musician. He had become a symbol of resilience, a guide for those who needed a light in the darkness. That evening, as he watched Maya fall asleep, he whispered, "We started on the street, Maya, and look how far we've come. But our dream never ends." Elijah knew that his music and his determination could continue to transform lives, and he was ready to dedicate every note, every chord, to this dream that had only just begun. As the years passed, Elijah Johnson remained true to himself. From a boy playing guitar on the streets of New Orleans, he became a renowned musician, a mentor to many young people, and a symbol of hope for his entire community. Every morning he returned to his neighborhood, not just to play, but to meet the children who dreamed of music, offering them instruments and free lessons. Maya, now a little older, always accompanied him, reminding everyone that behind every success was the love and support of a family. One day, while playing for a small crowd in a local park, Elijah saw a boy, guitar in hand, passionately playing his chords. The boy reminded him of his early days. Elijah approached him, placed an encouraging hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "Keep playing, every note can change your life." In that moment, Elijah understood that his true success lay not just in the concerts or records he sold, but in the lives he touched, the dreams he helped realize, and the hope he sowed. His music had become a living legacy. That evening, Elijah and Maya watched the sunset from the rooftop of their apartment building. The city lights shone like promise and possibility. Elijah clutched his guitar and smiled. "Maya, we started with nothing, just a guitar and a dream. And look now, we've changed our world, and maybe even other people's." Maya smiled and said, "Brother, our music is magical." And it was true. Elijah's music, born on the streets, had touched hearts, opened doors, and transformed lives. It would continue to resonate long after he was gone, a reminder that courage, perseverance, and love can truly change a person's destiny.